Hello and welcome to Climate Conversations. I'm Clare Nasir. In this show, we're talking about the co-benefits of sustainable fashion. In 2019, a scientific research paper detailed the discovery of microplastics and fibres in the Mariana Trench, the deepest part of the ocean. These fibres were traced back to man-made synthetic and semi-synthetic materials. More so, they were found inside marine organisms, proving these micropollutants had infiltrated even the most remote parts of the global food chain. The fashion industry is one of the largest contributors to global pollution. Every year, this sector pumps out nearly 10% of global carbon dioxide emissions, more than all international flights and maritime shipping combined. But the damage doesn't stop there. Fibres from textiles shed 500,000 tonnes of microplastics into the oceans annually, equivalent to 50 billion plastic bottles. These tiny invisible fibres enter our food chain, carrying toxic chemicals that harm marine life and even us. So how do we tackle this dual crisis of climate emissions and plastic pollution? The answer lies in rethinking the materials we use and understanding their full life cycle impact. Coming up, Alex Burkill talks to Professor Tamara Galloway, an eco-toxicologist at the University of Exeter, on her groundbreaking research. From the depths of Antarctica to inside the guts of Galapagos turtles, Tamara sheds a clear and stark light on the industry and the impacts across our seas and oceans. But she also discusses a positive transition that is emerging. Sustainable design processes, smarter material choices. There are many solutions that can decarbonise the industry. Actions vital to protect our planet's most vulnerable ecosystems. So here's Alex.
How long have you worked at the University of Exeter?
I've worked at the University of Exeter for 17 years, although I think I've just got here. I think I'm the new girl, but in fact I'm not.
And was this always something that you wanted to do?
Well, work in environmental sciences, yes, or I'm really interested in the environment and in how tiny little molecules can make a huge difference either to a person and to their health or to an entire ecosystem. That's the kind of science that fascinates me. I'm a biochemist by training.
So when it comes to fashion, what kind of impacts does it have on the environment and climate?
Well, I love fashion and I love clothes and I love changing the clothes that I'm wearing and buying different things, and it becomes apparent to you that your buying habits might be contributing towards the pollution that we've got in the environment as well. Because we study environmental pollution, we look at what we find in the environment, particularly in the aquatic environment, in the marine environment. And one of the things that we find an awful lot of are microplastics. And out of those microplastics, a significant portion, in fact, the major portion of them are fibres.
So a lot of people think microplastics, they don't really draw that similarity or draw that to your clothing. They often think of, plastic straws, other items of plastic packaging, for example. But actually clothing is a big part of the problem.
Yeah, clothing and textiles and manufacturing, or the manufacturing of clothing as well, they're big contributors towards pollution, both aquatic pollution in terms of chemicals, extraction of water sources. About 20% of aquatic pollution is attributed to the textiles industry globally, and the fibre pollution from washing clothes, but also from their use and also from their manufacture. It's also interesting that one of the major things that we throw away these days in the UK particularly, but globally as well, is whole items of clothing.
And that's an interesting point, because there are lots of things, plastic bottles, for example, that we've gone away from using as frequently as we used to, and they have this stigma now attached. We haven't quite got that yet with fashion yet, do we?
No, I don't think people realise that the clothing they wear could contribute not just to pollution in the environment, but also to climate change through greenhouse gas emissions. But in fact, it's not so much that the clothing that we wear is bad, it's the way that we produce it and the way that we use it is bad. We're massively producing huge numbers of clothing or huge abundances of clothing, and things are being produced to be worn once and thrown away. So this is a relatively new thing in the history of clothing and humanity that we've never done before. We've always valued our clothing and reused it and repurposed it and kept items for life. We don't do that anymore.
So there have been some changes over recent years, and you mentioned it, the idea of, wearing an item once or twice, then discarding it. That's a new thing, relatively new.
Relatively new thing, yes.
But on the other side, the idea of reusable, getting second-hand clothing, that's also taken off a bit more as well, hasn't it?
Yeah, that's a fantastic thing. So when you look at the clothing industry and the textiles industry and why it might be causing a problem, you see that you've got these very long, complicated supply chains where things are being produced in one country with very intensive processes, and they're passing somewhere else, and then we're mixing things, making very complicated fibres. We're making them into items of clothing that have many, many different components. They've got metal zips, plastic poppers, different kinds of materials in them. By the time we've done all of that, it's very hard to know how that supply chain is going to work. So what we're trying to do is circularize the system so that we're not doing such a complicated thing and then throwing things away, and it's very linear and it's very wasteful. We're trying to work with manufacturers, designers, and collectively with environmental scientists to design things differently, to design things with more of a circular economy feel, so that we don't take virgin materials out of the soil, but we try and reuse things. We recycle them, we repurpose them, and we stop things leaking out of the system into the environment.
So what are the big challenges with getting that in place to make that more common?
One of the big challenges is that if you look at a plastic bottle, and you look even just around the room that we're sitting in now, there is a bin in the corner, and it's clearly marked which item you should be putting into which bin. Your average person wearing a piece of clothing, there's no idea how to recycle that item of clothing when you're finished with it. What do you do with it?
Is the hope that we'd have labels on our clothing telling us how to recycle it?
Yeah, we realise that there's no one quick fix to the problems in the fashion industry. We have to look at all avenues. So we're looking at better labelling, so that we know where fabrics go, where all items of textiles go in the waste stream and how they end up in certain places. We're looking at better labelling so that consumers know what to do with those items. What bin do they put it in? Or can they put it into the bin? Or can they put it in with their rubbish? Or how do they recycle things? We're looking at better systems so that if you take something to the charity shop is able to know what the item of clothing is made of, so they know how to dispose of things. We're talking to manufacturers and designers so that they could design items of clothing that are made all from one fabric. Entirely polyethylene, for instance. So that goes down to the zip and the fastenings and other things, because one of the issues with clothing is that they are so complicated. It's not so easy to recycle, say, a pair of jeans. You've got studs, you've got a plastic zip, you've got metal studs, and you've got cotton fabric to make the jeans, and then you've maybe got synthetic trims on there. That's a lot of different things that you've got to then take apart and try and reassemble in a different way or recycle in a different way. So it's all about designing things, thinking about the end of life at the start. The whole thing is to try and decarbonise the whole system and reduce the energy in the entire system. So other projects that we've got funded through our system are looking at the dyeing process and looking at ways of using less energy. Certain dyes, you need to boil the item of clothing the textiles for 30 minutes at a high temperature to get the dyes to fix into the fabric. So we're looking at better methods of doing that in something called a wet spinning method, in which the dye is taken up into the fabric in a much more sustainable way, uses a much less energy and produces much less wasteful and potentially toxic dye.
There's an interesting point you raise, because cotton, for example, is often thought as a natural material when it comes to clothing, but the processes that it's put under to make it into clothing, whether it's the dyeing or mechanical processes, that changes it, so it's not really natural anymore, is it?
Absolutely, and that's one of the problems. One of the major kinds of fibre that we find in the environment are what we call the semi-synthetics, or the synthetic celluloses. So cellulose has been taken and it's been manufactured and changed. So although it is still a natural fibre, the finishing agents in there are not natural, and the colouring agents and the preservatives or the antioxidants. So you've actually made it a fibre that doesn't behave like a natural fibre anymore and is more likely to be persistent and to potentially cause problems in the environment.
Now, you mentioned microplastics already and how they're spreading into the ocean and affecting marine life, but you've worked on papers looking at how far the spread is in as far as Antarctica. Is that right?
That's right, yes. We've been studying with colleagues at the British Antarctic Survey the spread of microplastics and microfibers in the pristine sea ice and snow of the Antarctic, right down to the South Pole.
And so, and you don't think of that, do you, when you're buying an item of clothing and throwing it away, or anything really? You don't think that it's going to be, the impact of that is going to be so widespread. Yeah. And it's not just Antarctica, have you been looking at Galapagos turtles as well?
We've been looking at Galapagos turtles and what they have in their stomachs, and finding that they have a high number of fibres from textiles in their stomachs. So we've also been doing research on sharks off the UK coastline, which is where I first got particularly interested in the effects of clothing, because you don't wear something and immediately think it's going to affect marine life.
No, of course not.
But in this project with one of my master's students, Christian Parton, we were looking at bycatch from the fishing industry, and that bycatch includes some things like sharks and elasmobranchs and common endangered species that have been caught by accident. And looking at what they had ingested in their guts, we found that 70% of them had microplastics in their gut, and the majority of those microplastics were fibres. And we were able to work with colleagues at the University of Leeds to identify a lot of those fibres and try and work out what kinds of clothing had contributed to their release into the environment.
So we know that sharks are, they're getting plastics from clothing, and that's then affecting them.
And that's then entering their bodies, yeah.
So with that knowledge, what's the hope? What's the aim? What can we do to change this?
Well, the aim is to reduce the flow of microfibers, microplastics into the ocean. And there are many ways that we can do that. So we can work with manufacturers to design different fabrics, to spin different kinds of yarn that are much less likely to release microfibers when they're washed. And that can really reduce the flow of microfibers. So you go right back to the design process. You can weave them in different ways to make different textiles. You can make different kinds of fabric that are less likely to be thrown away because they're unreliable, and they're more resilient, and you can wear clothing for longer. Because one of the things that we do find is that it's generally the first wash of the clothing that releases most of the fibres. So if you can keep things in circulation for longer and get more wear out of your different items of clothing, then you're doing your bit for the environment.
Because every time you're washing it, you're getting less
and less
pollution coming from it.
But a great deal of the release of fibres is from the manufacture of textiles. So we're working with manufacturers and textiles designers to work at better ways of reducing that, better ways of cutting the fabric, better ways of dyeing it, so that you're not releasing, great clouds of microfibres into the air, which then are moving off around the environment.
So a big project that you're part of is the Future Fibres Network. Tell me more about this.
Well, we're really fortunate at the University of Exeter to be leading this large network, which was funded by the UK research hubs. And it's part of a consortium of 3 projects, which are all looking at different ways of decarbonising the fashion and textiles industry. So what we want to be able to do is produce a circular fashion and textiles industry for the UK. There's an initiative called Fashion and Textiles 2030, and it's aiming to reduce the carbon footprint of the industry by 2030. It's a voluntary agreement between all of the different industries that make up the fashion and textiles sector. So we're working to try and achieve that. And what we need to do is provide the environmental evidence or the scientific evidence that shows which processes are working and which processes are not working in producing better fabrics, in producing things that can either be biodegraded when they're released into the environment and they're made from natural fibres, things like pineapple fibres or other waste products. Or we're looking at ways of reducing the shedding of microfibers during the production of the materials. Or we're looking at better ways of recycling things by working with the recycling industries to sort things better, to clean things better. We're working with manufacturers who are producing better coatings to put on sports goods so that they smell less bad, because bad smelling sports gear or perma stink means that people throw things away, and it also means that you can't recycle the fabrics.
Yeah, because no one wants to buy a second-hand smelly jersey.
Smelly jersey,
Yeah.
no. But if you put a different coating on it, you can prevent the permastink from building up, and you can create a more sustainable item of clothing.
Permastink, I love that. You mentioned pineapple fibres.
That's right, yes. So one of the manufacturers is called Anasanam, and the University of the Arts London are working closely with them to make better fabrics which they make out of pineapples. So pineapple waste produces a lovely fibrous kind of material that can be used for textiles, and they're working to try and extend the use of those textiles to more hard-wearing service in the hotel and the hospitality industry, so that those biodegradable fibres could be used for sort of seat covers and for other items.
Oh, I see. So using a material that's otherwise going to waste for something that we want anyway.
Yeah, so that's a really good sustainable thing to do, to use a waste material, because cotton is something, we can go to natural fibres and they're fantastic and they're wonderful, but cotton takes up, I think, 2.5% of global farmland is taken up by growing cotton.
Oh, wow.
So actually, by using waste materials to make new fabrics, we're saving the use of that farmland for food.
And with using the pineapples, is that going to be cost effective, or are there
Well, this is the big thing, isn't it? We want to produce things that are cost effective, that actually create value and create a sustainable value chain that can actually work, rather than being prohibitively expensive and unusable or unsightly, or producing garments that nobody actually wants to wear.
Because I think that's one thing that's quite important with these changes that people are starting to make with the idea of fashion. There are co-benefits to it. It's not just the fact that we're doing, or people can do their bit for the environment and reduce the impact on the climate, but there are costs that can be saved.
Absolutely, yes. If you can reduce the energy costs of dyeing processes, for instance, you can produce things much more cheaply without having to, use all of that energy to heat things up to 90 degrees for half an hour, for instance.
And also, buying second-hand clothing.
Buying second-hand clothing has a massively reduced carbon footprint compared to buying new clothing.
Because it hasn't been manufactured, hasn't been moved around? Where is the biggest carbon coming from?
Manufacturing uses it has a huge energy budget. So again, the manufacturing of different textiles, yarns and clothing items, if we could switch the energy use of that to more sustainable energy, that would make a big difference as well.
And I suppose also the recycling takes energy as well. So the fewer items, garments that we're creating in the first place, that's positive.
I mean, ideally you would keep things in circulation for as long as you possibly could. Obviously some things fall out of circulation and then you have to recycle them as best you can. And what you want is to be able to sort those things well, to know what they're made of, to know which materials are recyclable and which materials are not recyclable, and know the best methods to put into that. So for example, one of the projects that we funded is on recycling neoprene from wetsuits. So Plan B, the company that's involved in that, has a recycling plant in Bulgaria. It would be nice to have one in the UK as well, and then we wouldn't need to transport those wetsuits for recycling all the way to Bulgaria, which has its own carbon footprint. You could keep them in the UK.
So with all the work that you're doing, what developments have been made, and what do you see happening in the near future? Positive steps. What does the plan look like?
We've been really lucky to receive this funding from the UK funding agencies. We've been able to fund £1 million worth of research projects really quickly, so they're up and running. We've got 8 projects through the Future Fibres Consortium already. They're already starting to deliver results. One of the projects is all about education between environmental scientists, textiles manufacturers and designers. How do you educate the people who are working in those different industries, or educate the students who are coming through those industries about the complexities of the situation in the other areas? So you want your designers to understand more about the environment. You want your environmental scientists to understand more about the complexities of design that maybe stop people designing things in the right way. By designing in the end of life, you can know more about protecting the environment. And for us, it's all about protecting the environment. We don't want to be finding all these fibres and bits of clothing in the stomachs of our marine animals. That's not where we want them to be.
And what are your biggest challenges?
Biggest challenges are, we always have to go back to money, don't we? Money is one of the driving factors. The current economic pattern is very linear for the clothing industry. So it's make, take, wear, dispose, and we want to circularise that. But to do that, you have to make it economically viable. So it's all about looking for opportunities that will actually be viable for people to follow.
Are there any countries, governments that are setting a really good example?
I think the UK is setting a pretty good example. It's nice to be able to say that UK is leading the way here, but we are really doing a really good example of setting up circular economy practices, and our abilities to understand the effects on the environment are second to none. So by putting those two things together, I think we're in a really good position to make a difference.
And to keep making beneficial changes.
Making beneficial changes, yeah.
Thanks so much, Tamara, for talking to me today. It's been really interesting. I wish I could talk to you for even longer, but I think I've taken up enough of your time.
Well, we're a really enthusiastic team here. Do come back any time. We're so positive about the things that we're doing. We'd love to be able to show you the progress that we're making as the projects develop.
Oh, amazing. Well, hopefully I'll see you soon.
Yeah, will do.
Our thanks to Professor Tamara Galloway for her time and expertise. Now, there's more information on the initiatives happening across sustainable textiles and fashion at the Future Fibres Network website. And on the broader topic of the co-benefits of climate action, go to our website. From Alex and I, thank you for watching, and we'll see you again soon.